All right, we are now live. Go ahead.
Great. I am calling to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors for February 16th, 2021. Our first item is the roll call.
Director Bregman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
And Director Schmidt.
Here.
And President Kohler.
Here. I'm now looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval to adopt the agenda.
Second.
And now we need a roll call vote.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. Okay, we are now convening to closed session, and that will.
Do we have any public comments on the closed session, Terry, before we close the Zoom?
We only have one attendee, but there's no comment. So there is no comment.
Okay. Then we'll let the attendee know that they can rejoin the meeting at approximately 7:30 after the closed session items have completed, and we can convene to closed session.
Great.
Okay, let me pause the recording. Ready to roll.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we are reconvening the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors for February 16th, 2021. We had no reportable items from the closed session previously. We are now turning to public comment on any item not, excuse me, not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any public comments?
Let me look. At this time, I do not see any raised hands. Thank you.
Okay, I'm turning now to directors and general managers announcements. Ben, do you have anything?
I do. A brief announcement this evening that as we had informed the board, the district is undertaking a preparation of a local hazard mitigation plan. And we actually were fortunate enough to get funding from Fema for the actual development of the plan. This plan will make us eligible for post-disaster recovery funding and even some other grant opportunities that come our way from the state and FEMA. In order to meet FEMA's requirements, we have a public access element. So our steering committee meetings, and the steering committees are composed of district staff and other local government staff. Those meetings will be open to the public, and recordings of the meetings will be posted on our local hazard mitigation plan website, and we'll have a contact to answer any direct questions. I just didn't want the board to, one, I wanted the public to understand that they'll be seeing opportunities, and two, I didn't want the board surprised when you saw anything going out to the public about these steering committees.
Great, thank you. Anything else, Ben?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Any announcements from the rest of the board?
Not me.
Okay, and nothing from me. That brings us to the consent calendar, and I am looking for a motion to approve.
Move approval.
President, I want to remove item 5, please.
Sure. Okay. Anything else on the consent calendar? Okay, then with that amendment, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
We're looking for a roll call, Terry.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. So that brings us to item 5, adoption of the director's handbook. Ben, did you want to present on this, or Director Bregman, did you just want to jump in?
I have some comments on it. We can leave it to the end of the agenda if you want. So
Oh, that's fine. All right. I'm happy to move on. So we'll just defer item 5 until the end of the regular calendar. That brings us to item 8, the water supply report for January 2021.
Good evening, directors. Paul Sellier. Just going to share my screen here and get us started. Yeah, good evening. The water supply report for January. And tonight we have not just our normal water supply report, we have some drought response actions sort of tacked on to the end of the usual slides for our January water supply report. And we'll roll through some of the usual items touching on taste and odor, obviously water production and supply for January. And then we'll get into some storage projections and have a discussion about our drought response actions. And there's lots of data to follow in some of those. So just jump in and ask any questions. Our taste and odor for January looks fairly normalized, I'm happy to say. As you can see, these bars are fairly similar. There is a somewhat lingering taste and odor that is occurring, but it looks like it's nothing out of the ordinary. Our monthly water production, again, fairly normal. I would draw your attention to the imported water where we've taken 4,500 acre feet and we're only just towards, getting towards the middle of February here. That's 85% of our normal annual allotment, which is good. So we're making progress on that. Again, here, January, looking at monthly comparisons, this appears to be a fairly typical, nothing unusual in our water production for January. Looking at our 12-month potable chart, this, more maybe so interesting than just the production is sort of still uncertain as to whether it's turning a corner downward or continuing its upward trend. It does give us an opportunity, though, to look back at the last time we achieved some significant conservation, and that was through the 13-14 drought. And you can see here that the peak to trough, this represents a reduction of about 22%. And if we were able to achieve the same percent here, it would, you can see, make a dramatic impact for us. So bear that in mind for our discussions later on. Rainfall, we are tracking 1976-77 to put the rainfall in context for us. And I have to say that looking at the forecast and how much rainfall we've had to date, we might actually be happy if we achieve the 1976-77 rainfall numbers at this point. I hope I'm wrong.
Just pause there for a minute, Paul.
Yep.
Just for people who are listening. So I think those of us on the board understand that 76-77 is considered the worst drought in modern history, but can you expand on that a little bit?
I'm not sure it needs expanding, but yes, yes, it is.
Could you, as you're doing that, distinguish for us, and there's more information later, between rainfall, but where we may stand in terms of volume different than the 76-77?
Yes, of course. So, so as you know, in 1983, Kent Lake was the dam was raised, adding significant capacity to the water district's storage. So we are in a very different, and of course, Sulahuli was completed in 1979. So we are in a very different place than we were in 76-77 drought in terms of storage. That said, while rainfall is of course very interesting for us, the real picture is runoff, and we'll see. We have some data later on that will make a little more sense in terms of setting this in sort of historic context for us. So if you'll bear with me, we'll get to that shortly here. Following on with January, of course, at the end of January, we finished at about 68.5% in terms of average storage for the date. Right now, today, we're at 66%, or as of yesterday. So, the rainfall has helped a little bit. Again, total reservoir storage, we are divergent, obviously, from our average, both on account of rainfall, but the way the rain has fallen has just simply not generated much in the way of runoff for the reservoirs. You can see, though, that the rainfall that we have had, there's a little uptick here, but it's really more a flattening of that curve than it is any infill.
And also notably on that slide, if you can just go back, Paul, I wanted to point out, even though rainfall, we're tracking 76, 77, you can see we have far more storage than we did at that time. So we aren't really even close to that level of crisis, and we hope not to be.
Yes, I second that. Thanks, Ben. And then our planned purchases of water continue, and you can see here in January, excuse me, we were able to receive almost 900 acre feet or so. And as I mentioned, we've taken about 85% of our normal allotment already. I would note that I was just attending the North Marin Water District Board meeting where they discussed filling Stafford. And of course, they will be doing that to I think adding about 600 acre feet or so to that reservoir. And that will reduce our capacity in the North Marin Aqueduct for about 2 months, so 6 to 8 weeks. And that reduction is, I believe, about 4 million gallons a day. So it's a significant hit for us, and will make achieving some of these targets that you see here more challenging for us. So as I move into storage projections, we've seen this chart a number of times over the last several months. And I think tonight we should focus probably on this blue line, which represents about 50% of rainfall. And to date, we're about 47% of rainfall. So I think it's a pretty good projection for us to focus on this evening. And again, for members of the public, the black line is our actual storage level in the reservoir over time. Here's the months and the years on the x-axis down here. And the chart goes from January of 2020 all the way out to April of 2022, with the dashed portion of these lines being the projections. And so these storage projections, as you can see, in April of this year, we're looking at being under our voluntary target, right? This is our trigger for voluntary actions, storage of less than 50,000 acre feet. And it looks like we're projecting about 45,000 acre feet for April 1st. So we're going to definitely hit that trigger, but we're going to miss significantly this 40,000 acre foot trigger here. And interestingly, the district has actually never hit this trigger on April 1st. We've always had some sort of a miracle escape. So fingers crossed for March, right?
Well, yeah, it's like, are you gonna go further?
No, go ahead, Ben.
I just, sorry for interrupting, but wanted to note to the board that a couple things in terms of these triggers. The actions we're asking or recommending the board take tonight in the next item, the declaration of the drought and requesting voluntary reductions. We're doing that in advance of April 1st. So we're looking at these, we believe, appropriately as guidance, but not constraints. And you'll see more of this data that I think supports that recommendation. And further, if we don't hit the mandatory April 1st, if we don't get measurable rain, staff's now thinking that we would bring some additional recommended actions come April 1st. And we'll be having a lot of discussions with the board, certainly on what that may look like.
Okay, thanks for that. So really, this is just showing our projections in relative position to where those triggers were. And then to sort of help set the storage in context, it's helpful for us to take a look at demand. And I've broken it out in fairly gross terms here with potable uses, environmental, evaporative losses, and of course, system losses. And as you can see, when you add these up, it's a fairly significant number. And I would say that maybe there's some, I don't want to say flexibility, but this number for environmental releases, obviously in dry years, we end up releasing more water because there's no rainfall to support the creek system. So all of it needs to come from our reservoir. So if there was some rainfall events, this number might come down a little bit. But I think it's a pretty conservative estimate here. So total demands on our system of about pretty close to 40,000 acre feet a year. So what does that look like in our storage projections? So I've put this on I've sort of tried to simplify our storage chart. So here's our 25% projection in blue. Sorry, excuse me, 50% of average projection in blue. And then the dashed orange line represents, about 39,000 acre feet of water. And so I would also draw your attention to this black line I've put on here, which is really the unusable volume. So as you might imagine in the reservoirs, they're not a perfectly engineered system. And so access to every last drop of the water is not necessarily available. Now, there may be some things that we can do to improve that number, but right now it's set at about 4,000 acre feet. And then, how does our current situation stack up with those events of the past that we know about? And since 1983, really, there have been two major droughts. One was the 89 to 92 drought, and obviously more recently in our memories is 2013. And so when we look at 2021, so this year, where we're projecting our storage at about 45,000 acre feet, and compare that to 2013, where we had 74,000 acre feet, and this is as of April 1st, and then as of 1990, there was 48,000 acre feet April 1st in the reservoir system. So we're fairly comparable to 1990, and in fact, 3,000 projecting to be less. The December 1st storage numbers tell a similar picture. Of course, this projection is further away and less certain because we can't predict exactly what's going to happen in March. So looking at 1990, there was less than 30,000 acre feet in the reservoir system, and we're projecting somewhere around 26,000 acre feet in our reservoirs at that time. Comparing to last year, where we had 47,000 acre feet, and in 2013, 48,000 acre feet. On average, we would have 53,000 acre feet or so in the reservoir system. And again, this slide reinforces that it's really not rainfall, but runoff that's really crucial to the water storage. And as you can see in 2020, although we had almost twice as much rain as in 2013, just the pattern of that rainfall did not translate into a large amount of runoff. In fact, an extremely low amount of runoff, 14,350 or so acre feet, compared to 2013, 21,300, and 1990 that had 19,200. So some of the stats in the red box here, we've got the second lowest rainfall in 90 years. The runoff that we had for the reservoir storage system was less than the past two droughts. And our projected level of storage looking forward to December is lower than that in 1990. And so, this information really does suggest that maybe an earlier start to our conservation efforts is warranted. In looking at how we would respond to the drought, there are obviously a couple of approaches. One is to increase our supply, and the other is to look toward our conservation. And in terms of increasing supply, we're tapping some seldom used reservoirs. And as you know, Phoenix Lake is being pumped at the moment up to Bontempi. And so far, as of this morning, we had used about 38 acre feet over the past 5 or 6 days. The board approved the rental of generators for Sulahuli so that we can transfer water from Sulahuli over to Nicasia Reservoir. And we've already mentioned that we're optimizing our supplemental water, having already taken 85% of our annual allotment, and are positioned to take more as subject to availability of capacity in that system. And tonight there's an item on the agenda for rehabilitation of the Castanya pump station, which would help us address some of those shortfalls in capacity in that aqueduct system. Recycled water operations from the Las Colinas Sanitary District are due to start up, I understand, late March, April timeframe, and that will be very timely for us. We're showing that our recycled water demand will be about 700 acre feet. So that's currently served with potable while the plant's being constructed. And so we'll be able to sort of shift that into the recycled water column. As I mentioned, we are trying to improve our access to the unusable portion of water in the reservoirs. And we are exploring, I would say, changes to the environmental releases. And lastly, reviewing, other emergency projects should the dry weather continue for the next several months. As the board knows, water supply projects are not a short time frame project. They take quite some time. So at the moment, we're just sort of reviewing those projects. So as I mentioned, you'll be hearing tonight in the next presentation, and Ben mentioned already that we have a water shortage contingency plan that the board has already approved with April 1st triggers of 50,000 acre feet for 10% voluntary and 40,000 acre feet for 25% mandatory on April 1st to December 1st, mandatory of 50% should we be projected to be at or near 30,000 acre feet. Now, right now, I think it's safe to say that these trigger levels have never really been tested. In fact, even the 50,000 acre foot number has only been hit a couple of times. The 40,000 foot trigger has never been hit. And the data that we're seeing, I think, in the projections that we've seen tonight do suggest that perhaps there's support for earlier action. And you'll hear from Carrie in the next presentation on specifically what those actions would be. But looking at what effect those might have over the short term here between April and December, so over our sort of summertime consumption, interestingly, summertime consumption accounts for about 77% of our annual consumption. So in those 6 months over April through December or so, or October, that time frame, we're looking, at about 77, 80% of our consumption occurs during that time. So over summer, then we'd be looking at a typical consumption of 16,500 acre feet, and the percent conservation savings that would add directly to our bottom line, if you like, directly saving water in the reservoirs in the quantities shown here. The 10% and 20% are voluntary measures proposed anyway, and the 30 to 50s would be mandatory. And then what effect would that have? So going back to our storage projections, selecting a 25% conservation level. If you focus on the blue dashed line, that's our standard, or not our standard, but our 50% of rainfall line that we're sort of looking at as most closely matching our current conditions. And the gray line just above that, that is the effect of conservation on that particular storage line. So it's quite significant over time. And just gives the board an idea of how effective conservation can be. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, these are our trigger points. And as we get toward April, we'll be able to refine our projections, right? As we get into summer and there really isn't any rainfall to predict, then our demand projections become a little bit more accurate. So we'll be back to the board in April with some firmer numbers there. Summarizing broadly, rainfall and runoff are at historic lows. And that's not just true for Marin Municipal, it's similarly true for North Marin. Storage levels are significantly lower than average. And our projections show that, by December, we'll have less water in the reservoirs than we did in the drought of 1990s. And to that effect, our storage levels, we're looking at, somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 acre feet, December 1st. We are working towards optimizing our water supply. And we acknowledge that the effect of conservation is absolutely critical. It does have limits in the short term. It takes a little while to get things going. And I think these, the data show that these historic conditions warrant an early and effective start to our drought response. That concludes my presentation this evening.
Thank you, Paul. That was comprehensive and really very helpful as always. This is an information item, so I'm going to ask if the board has any questions or comments, and then we'll go to public comment. Okay.
Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is Sonoma tapping any groundwater, any of its groundwater resources?
Well, the contractors, and Ben may be better positioned to answer this than I am, but the contractors to Sonoma do have groundwater resources. And I think some of them have. Santa Rosa may have started using their groundwater, but there are others that have not.
Yeah, I think, Paul, that's right. Santa Rosa, as a matter of course, does supplement what they get from the county with groundwater. And they're looking to increase that, and others do it in different ways, including one that has, as I understand it, a well field that isn't in operation, but they do have. And it's limited. I don't think any of them, maybe other, perhaps in Rohnert Park, has the current capacity to really address a big shortage. Many of them do it because you drill a well and the cost structure is different than buying water. So it makes sense to add groundwater as part of their portfolio.
Does Sonoma Water have any groundwater resources?
Sonoma Water as an agency, I believe they do not. They are looking as part of a long-term resiliency effort at groundwater storage in the Santa Rosa Plains, maybe Petaluma, or maybe combination, but that's moving, relatively slowly, that whole resiliency effort and that component. What we're trying to support it every way we can.
And then, I think it kind of follows that if we do go into voluntary or mandatory conservation, it's going to create mandatory reduction of revenue for our operations.
And we do get into some of those details, Director Bragman, in the next presentation. And it's actually a very good point, and we do have a slide breaking that down a bit.
Yeah, it's helpful but sobering presentation.
Yeah, Larry, you should also realize that we're extracting groundwater from the rainy collectors. We don't pull water out of the river. There's two flows, the surface water flow, and then there's a subsurface flow. And I've asked this question before, is there a stage drop? Is there a surface decrease at the rainy collectors in the river? And there isn't, meaning that there's basically no impact on the river itself. from our extractions. There's actually a separate underground river flow
Right.
that runs through there. So
Right.
we're pulling groundwater too, basically, for this.
In a sense, right? Because they're coming from the caissons, what they call the caissons, next
The
to,
rainy collectors,
next-
they're horizontal.
next to Lake Sonoma.
They're in the river,
Wow.
in the river itself. Yeah, they're actually in the bottom of the river, but they're not connected. The two aren't, there's no substantial hydraulic connection between the bottom of a river and the river that goes underneath it. So we're actually drawing, like I said, if there were a substantial connection, then there would be a drop in stage. So if you went past the rainy collectors, they're at some curve in the river down upstream of Gurneyville. There's a extraction point there, and there would be a drop in the surface of the river, but there isn't a drop. The river just keeps on right on going past the rainy collectors.
Okay. Okay. I'm just wondering if it continues to get tight, whether we can help in some way develop groundwater usage.
Yeah, one thing that is not a barrier, it's just a complication from where we were, say, 5 years ago, is the GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Act, that is starting to put controls on unconstrained pumping of groundwater, state mandated, right, throughout the state. We're all aware of the issues that's caused.
Yeah.
So that would be part of the process. I'd say looking at Lake Sonoma, I don't know, Paul, if you have a feel for how much demand is currently in Lake Sonoma. Annual demand, is it multi-year?
Yeah, Lake Sonoma is a multi-year storage reservoir. I think it's a 4-year storage, and currently about 3 years, I think, in the reservoir at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Which is the one, Paul, that has 800,000 acre feet? That's Mendocino?
No, so Lake Sonoma, I think, has a water supply pool of 245,000 acre feet. And Mendocino is somewhat less. I want to say 100 and change, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen Mendocino get very, very low.
Yeah, Mendocino is quite low right now, although I understand it's actually received a little bit of water as a result of the rains. So it's improved slightly. It's sort of in the 40% range compared to Lake Sonoma right now, which is, I think it's 65% or so.
Okay. Any other board comments on this item? All right. Do we have any comments from the public on this item?
I do not see any raised hands up. Oh, yes, I believe there is one. The hand went away though, so I don't know who that was. Mr. Roberts, there we go. Mr. Roberts?
Roger?
Uh-oh.
There
Roger,
you
do
go.
you need to unmute?
There you go.
There you go.
I'm not muted anymore. Okay,
There you
good.
go.
God forbid, but if we have a wildfire here in Marin at various locations and even more disastrously if it occurred in the watershed, do we have any idea how much water?
Oh, you went back on mute, Mr. Roberts.
Can
Can you hear
Go
me
ahead,
now?
Mr. Roberts. Yes.
Okay. If we have a wildfire in Marin, and God forbid that should happen, and if it should also affect the watershed of the water district, how much do we have any idea how much water would have to be used out of our own storage to fight a wildfire, and what that would do to our storage and mandatory conservation measures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm not the short answer is no. in terms of how much water would be needed, right? It would be a fair amount of water. I just have no way of quantifying how much that would be. I would note that the Point Reyes fire and other fires last year, the water district was asked if the super scoopers could use Nicasio if the ocean became too rough. But our lakes are they're not big enough really to accommodate. Nicasio is really pushing the limits of getting a super scooper in there and sucking up 5,000 gallons and then getting them out the other side before they crash into something. It's pretty tight. I know, I'm sure they could do it, but the rules and regs, I think they were saying it's pretty tight. So anyway, last time they used Tamales Bay quite successfully, and so maybe they would do that again.
I don't think it's significant, Roger, the quantity of water that would be used. Plus, in the early times of the water district, there was a proposal to cut down all the trees because the trees were stealing the water from the people. And basically, we've seen all this issue about mudslides and all that. The problem after a fire is that the ground changes, the soil changes, and also there's no trees, no leaves. So a lot of things change, a lot more runoff occurs when you don't have trees and ground cover.
Well, can I ask a more particular question? If you have a standard size house here in Marin and it catches fire, whether it's from a wildfire throw of ashes or firebrands or whatever source, how much water is required to put out a fire in a household? And if it's 50 households or 500 households as a result of a wildfire, what would be that calculation?
Well, I mean, you could certainly go through and try to put numbers on things, but honestly, in some areas of the wildland urban interface, depending on the wildfire, obviously, they may not even attempt defensive structures.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. I think in a wildfire, you're really focused on evacuation and setting up fuel breaks, fire breaks, through backburns and that sort of stuff. You really, these get too big too quickly to have a line with hoses for the most part, at least. That's my understanding and what I saw happen in Santa Rosa.
I would think, Ben, that a normal house fire, you could easily burn 30,000 gallons
Yeah,
for a fire.
something like that, or even a bit more, that
Yes.
wouldn't really be measurable in our scope of daily consumption.
Yeah, you might use a month's worth of water for a house at one event. But then, Roger, keep in mind that now the house is gone. So now their demand is down. So it's again a two-edged sword in the difficulties of having a fire.
I recognize that if the flames are higher than 8 feet, you're not going to fight it with a hose.
Yep.
Okay. Any other comments on this item?
I have one other question, Paul. Are we pumping out of Lagunitas?
No, we're not at the moment, but Lagunitas, we would just open a valve and that could go into Bontempi.
Are you giving that any consideration?
Yeah, we're going to look at it actually. We just need to make sure the valves are working and that the lake water quality is going to match up okay, which it should do.
Got to exercise the valves?
Yeah, that's right. Make sure they can close again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Roger, I did a project one time in Indianapolis and the nickname for the fire department was Surround and Drowned. So, that's a bit of what goes on. I mean, they want it out now. So they use as much water as they need to use to get the fire out quickly.
President Kohler, at this time, I do not see any more raised hands for public
Okay.
comment.
Unless there's any more board comments, I'd like us to move on now to item 9, which is the declaration of initial drought water conservation actions.
Okay, I'm going to kick this off with the first couple slides and then hand it over to our expert, and Carrie will walk through in detail the actions that we're recommending we ask of our customers. Next slide. So this is a reminder of what Paul showed you, the current, what we have on the books in terms of triggers, and we're currently anticipating that April 1st will fall between 50,000 and 40,000. And we're thinking, of course, we hope to get as much as we can, but that perhaps based on what Paul showed you last year, last drought with voluntary reductions, we could get up to 20% reduction. So that's part of our thinking, and we kind of fit in between these two, which seems to work for now. And as we see what happens with, I think the remainder of February is pretty clear in the forecast, but what happens through March. Next slide. So this is the financial impact of these actions that I referenced earlier. It's really a combination of lost water revenue and unbudgeted expenditures. So the lost revenue, if we assume the 20% reduction that we're hoping we'd be able to achieve through just these voluntary actions from now through December 1st, it's about an $8 million drop in revenue. And then the unbudgeted related to drought expenditures includes the big cost of Sulahuli along with Phoenix pumping, the increase in Sonoma water supply beyond our minimum, and then some additional costs associated with outreach that aren't dominant, but are costs. Collectively, well, I can do the math here. It's about 12.5 million. We do have 9.4 million in the district's rate stabilization reserve. So we'd anticipating that coupled with tightening of our belt would be able to get us through that. Were we to come to the board in April, if the weather doesn't change, looking for additional conservation that could be mandatory, perhaps linked to irrigation over the summer months, that would be a much deeper cut, or maybe comparable. We haven't run the calcs. And at that point, we would be thinking about potentially ways to address our financial picture through some sort of drought rate that we'll be talking to the board between now and that point in time, early or mid-April. So I don't know if there's any questions on these two slides. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Carrie to dive into the water conservation and related activities that we're going to be asking our customers. Okay, Carrie.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the response plan that we put together for this initial drought water conservation action. We're going to focus on three items this evening: the Waterways Prohibitions, what we're requesting from our customers, and then finally implementation. Starting with the Waterways Prohibitions. So the district code has a number of landscape prohibitions already on the books. We've pulled them out here into one concise slide. If you noticed in our many of our recent social media posts, we're really focusing on the first two items. We're trying to build education to boost the understanding of the codes that we have in place for our customers to help engage with us and help us reduce demand. So looking at irrigation hours being limited to the evenings, right? Nights and evenings. We don't want midday irrigation. And then also limiting irrigation to no more than 3 days per week. We're approaching the irrigation season, and perhaps with the limited rainfall, we've already seen some customers have already begun irrigating, and so we really want to start pushing out this education to engage with them in a more meaningful way. Of course, we have additional prohibitions beyond just landscape irrigation. Gutter flooding is another. It may be tied to irrigation, but not necessarily. It could be a leak or closing down hard surfaces, et cetera. And so we'll be looking for folks to comply with those prohibitions as well. Repairing leaks are very important. We have a couple of items within our code that calls for a timely repair of a leak that's found on a customer's property. In addition, we have some hospitality items I'll cover in detail a little later. What we'll be doing to engage with the hospitality sector around the code. So, lodging needs to have options for not laundering towels every day, and restaurants need to not just serve water to all customers, it needs to be upon request. Finally, there's items within the code, restrictions within the code around pool covers and use of non-recirculating decorative fountains. So of course, when we start pushing out these waterways prohibitions, we need to start talking about enforcement. As I mentioned, our goal initially in this voluntary call to action, it's really about education. We're engaging with our customers to help them understand and really reinforce the codes we have in place. And so we have information on our website, via our social media posts. We'll be working with staff to educate our staff internally, the field crews, to help us use door hangers, again, to help educate customers. We know no one wants to be a water waster, and so we want to leverage that and help them, do the right thing around saving water. Warnings will be issued for any of these prohibitions. We'll send letters that, we know that a number of customers will assist us in finding violators or folks who are not complying with these waterways prohibitions. And so when they're verified violations, we'll send a letter out and engage with the customer to help educate them. But we fully acknowledge that if these drought conditions continue, there will need to be an escalation for these offenses, and penalties are under development, and we're having discussions around what that might look like down the road. And of course, that will come back to the board. So a request to our customers, what are we asking them to do? So during this voluntary call to action to reduce their demand, we really want to not only push the rules around waterways prohibition, but we want to engage with them on our programs and our offerings that we have available. We have a number of rebates for clothes washers and smart controllers, incentives for converting turf to low water use plant materials. Those all will be included in our outreach campaign. Our staff is ready and available to assist with house calls or going, engaging with folks on how they use water in their home and where there are ways to save. Unfortunately, we're not doing field work because of COVID, but we are doing phone calls and customers. We've gotten really great response from customers that they feel it's been continued to be very helpful, even though it's not in person. We provide for free faucet aerators, shower heads, hose-in nozzles, toilet leak detection tabs. So customers just need to call us or send us an email. They can call customer service. They can call the conservation hotline. We have these hardware readily available to assist customers in taking these initial actions to reduce their demand. And finally, gray water, the last bullet there. As we continue down this path, gray water may be a good option for ensuring that there's adequate water supply to irrigate those plants that you hold near and dear and that you want to ensure survive any continued drought. In addition to program offerings, we also know that there's other ways that we can engage customers to reduce their use. So of course, checking for leaks is low-hanging fruit. That's an easy one. We hope anyone who knows they have a leak will get on that and get it repaired. Turning off their irrigation systems, as opposed to just limiting it to the watering schedule that we have within our code. many established landscapes will survive without having any irrigation and only hand watering plants as needed. Learning how to read your meter is another great way to track your water use, understand your water use, and spot leaks. Adding compost and mulch to gardens is a great way to retain any soil moisture that we do get from the precipitation. The way we've been getting rain, it's a little bit of rain every few days. And we want to continue that as long as possible. And so we want to retain that soil moisture. And then the last three items are really focused on, holding off on refilling fountains and swimming pools and hot tubs, just, acknowledging that may not be an essential use. We'd love to have folks pride themselves on having a dirty car, have a dirty car challenge. And instead of having folks wash their car at home, we could take it to, if they must wash it, take it to a car wash that recycles water. We'll have a list of car washes on our website in the next few days to help folks make that choice of which car washes are using recycled water or actually recycle their water. And finally, asking folks to not power wash buildings or homes. Again, just focusing on those, if it's not needed, now's not the time to do it. Finally, implementation. So how are we rolling this out? Of course, my team will work really closely with communications on pushing most of these items out, if not all of them. And so Jeannie and I have been, working on this diligently. So notifying the media, of course, is very important. Educating around waterways prohibitions and conservation programs I've already touched on. We'll also prepare some educational brochures, inserts, and videos, etc., to provide a list of simple things that people can do to save water. This would be turning off the water when you brush your teeth, or using a broom instead of a hose, and not letting the faucet run when you're doing the dishes. And we all think, well, those are small and they may not have much of an impact, but really what it's doing, it's triggering that behavioral change. And we know that those little actions add up to be significant. And as Paul showed in the last presentation, we saw 22% reduction in demand during the last voluntary call to action. So we know our customers, if they hear us, they'll react. And that's really what we're looking for at this time, is that a similar level of engagement. We'll be considering some targeted marketing, and I'll really rely on Jeannie. She's the expert to figure out where that targeted marketing will be done. Engaging with community groups. I have a whole slide on community groups we'll be working with to help push out this information, and I think that's a good opportunity for the board to assist if they're willing and interested, depending on the group we're speaking to. Waterways reporting has been being ramped up. We have an internal process that's been solidified to ensure that we can handle calls coming in. And then also we have an outward facing opportunities within the website, and a phone call that can be made to let us know about water waste. And finally, we acknowledge the importance of explaining kind of where we are as far as water supply and what future actions we may be asking of the public. And while we don't have the details of that worked out and we're not ready to talk about that tonight, we do want to acknowledge that we are planning for what the next steps may be so that we're prepared as we move forward. The sector-specific outreach. So we're working with communications teams to put together a presentation slide deck that we can take out and use to educate a variety of folks, starting with our homeowner associations and landscape contractors. I think irrigation is going to be a focus for us in the coming months, and we want to bring them along in this process. It's very important. Providing updates to city and town councils will be very important as well. Not only are they our water customers, so we want to engage with them to help them understand opportunities to save, but they also can help disseminate the information to the broad public. Hospitality industry, so working with hotels and restaurants, acknowledging the challenges they've had this last year with COVID, and they're finally being able to reopen, and so balancing the their need to open and limit their restrictions, but also what tools can we provide to bring them along and assist them. So table tents in restaurants, and doing some marketing material with hotels around linen service options for customers that come and stay. And then finally, community groups is another opportunity, I think, for board members to participate in, you know, rotaries and chambers. Those are, you know, business leaders sort of opportunities to help push the word out and engage. Looking, of course, at our dedicated irrigation customers. So that would be not only our towns and cities, golf courses, etc., but, you know, business leaders as well. Am I good or did I freeze? I think I'm good. Okay.
Still frozen.
All right. Oh. Looking at our highest water.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Reaching out to our highest water users, right? So all those, the tier 4 customers, and educating them on opportunities to reduce demand and what our call for action is. Engaging with the prison as well. I think that's they're a significant water user we want to reach out to. And finally, our AMI customers, you know, these are the customers that have access to the most detailed information on their water use, and ensuring that they leverage that opportunity to understand where they're using their water. From the prior discussion, I would add engaging with Fire Safe Marin. You know, we've been in conversations with them as well, but there's a lot of material around, you know, impacts of drought on landscaping, and we can work closely with them to push out information too. So I'll make sure to add that to my list. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ben unless there's questions on this, and he can cover final remarks and or the recommendation.
Yeah, I did want to note that tomorrow at the Communication Conservation Committee, Carrie is going to be going over in some detail what refinements can we do to our conservation program? How can we build it generally and particularly given the drought? So we'll have another opportunity to dive into some of those areas tomorrow. I mean, we could entertain that discussion now, but just sharing that that's designed to go tomorrow, in part to address the board comments that came during the 10-year financial plan on how could we invest more in conservation, but also obviously it's a very timely discussion as well with the drought.
Got it. Well, thank you, Carrie, for that incredibly comprehensive review. We'll take public comments in a minute. I want to see if there's any board comments first. I just will say for myself, it looks like a great approach. I'd still like to see us being a little more aggressive on the landscape change out. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think we need, and we can hold that till tomorrow, but I do think we need you know, more of a conversation about what we can do on landscape given, you know, actually, let me just ask you, Carrie, do you have an estimate about how much of our potable water supply is going to outdoor landscaping, just on the residential side, since we have 92% of our customers are residential?
Yeah, we see demands double during the summer. So I think that,
Exactly.
you know, that kind of gives us an idea of what the opportunity might be.
Yeah, I'd like us to get a little more granular. We don't need to tonight, but I mean, I think there's a real opportunity there, and we should really be talking more about that. But I'll just leave my comments there. But any other board comments on this item? Okay, any public comments on this item? Seeing none from Terry?
Yeah, at this time, I do not see any raised hands. Yeah, no raised hands.
Okay, this is an approval item, so I'm looking for a motion.
The motion would be adopting the resolution declaring the initial drought water conservation actions.
Exactly.
Move approval.
Thank you, Larry.
Second.
And now we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Thank you again, Carrie, and the rest of the staff for your
thank
great
you.
work on this. That brings us to item 10, wildfire resilience study. This is about the final report. This is an information item.
Yeah, if I'll just briefly kick this off and hand it over to Aaron Fulton, who will walk us through. The intention tonight is to follow up with the board on the direction that you provided us in the initial presentation we provided you, namely to go out to certain groups, and we'll give an update on that and share what we've done and gotten any feedback and incorporate any suggested revisions or updates or changes, at least consider them in this report. And then we also just want to take the opportunity to final this report. This is an important report we want to have on our website, and we want to follow it. So having it not in draft form feels important. With that, Aaron?
Appreciate it. So let me try to share my screen here. And can you see the full screen? Or is that better?
That's better. Yeah, that's better.
Perfect. Okay, great. So yeah, Aaron Fulton, I'm an associate engineer in the design group. I'm here tonight really on behalf of the Wildfire Task Force, which I was the chair, tasked with kind of pulling together a whole group of individuals from across the district to look at really in a granular form our wildfire resilience to our overall system and even the surrounding community. So tonight, just presenting this item as an informational item, as Ben said, we're looking to both touch on kind of a quick background for those of you, it's been about a year since we last presented this, provide some updates, which includes outreach and engagement that Ben mentioned, some internal processing and tracking measures that we've placed, then also really touch on some of the actions that we've already implemented. And then finally, just really present what we are calling in quotations, if you will, the final wildfire resilience study. And the quotations is really meant to stress that this document is really envisioned as a living document that will be updated periodically to reflect both the things that we have implemented, also to reflect kind of changing priorities, states of science as advancements occur and change how we look to manage fire and water. So that's really the goal. And then really briefly touch on next steps. So for a quick background, back in April of 2019, we formed the Wildfire Task Force. It was composed of about 15 staff from really all facets, all divisions of the water district, folks that are now in our operations division, also in finance, facilities and watershed, engineering, and really the scope of that group of people was really to look at what our vulnerability was to wildfire. We conducted about approximately 15 meetings over 12 months, and we had one really underlying goal, and that was to really look at and try to increase our preparedness for wildfire and to ensure that we have some level of resilience to both protect our operations, whether it be from a business continuity standpoint, water production, and then also our neighboring communities. I've touched on previous presentations, and you can see in the final report that really our infrastructure is woven quite in a complex manner within the wildland urban interface. So development and management of our system are really one and the same.
Mr. Fulton, I'm sorry to interrupt. I got a couple of texts that we can't see the entire screen of your PowerPoint presentation.
How about that?
Is cut off.
Is that better?
For me, I can only see half. I'm not too sure about our board members or directors if they can see the full screen.
It's the same.
Interesting.
Is it full screen on your laptop?
Yeah, I think when you
Yes.
started it, Aaron, you might have clicked the wrong button, maybe. So if you click the button on the top in the orange area that has the full screen, So where it has a little save disk and then the back and the forward. No.
Well, here, at least we can see the whole slide.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we just do it, see what this looks like.
Can you see the whole slide right now? The,
Yeah.
the title slide?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, but
Smaller,
if you close the animation on the far upper right corner, it'll make the picture a little bit bigger. It's going to be hard to see the words in a second.
The animation pane, the top
Yeah.
right.
This one here.
Near the upper right corner, you'll see animation P is what we see. It's in the
Yeah, for some reason I can't see that. It's interesting.
Well, let's go for it and let's see if we'll be able to read it.
Okay. Let's get back to where we were then. So can you see at least now the title for Wildfire Task Force goal?
No.
We're still on the first slide.
Yeah, you have to click on that slide where you left off.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
How's that?
Great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Teamwork.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, okay, back to it. So the goal was essentially to look at our wildfire preparedness and really the resilience and protection of both our system and also the neighboring communities. One of our primary objectives was to develop really a document, a fire preparedness document that integrates the information we have and we know about our system, also identifies the information that would be useful to know, so data gaps, and also a document that really could be the foundation that outlines a process and structure for improving our level of resilience. So identifying potential actions, hazard reduction actions that we may want to implement, and providing a mechanism or at least a plan for how we may implement those in the future. Our secondary objectives are actually, I feel they're primary in some respects because it also informs the rest of the staff, the organization, the board, our agency partners, and really our public that we're serving of what our current preparedness status is and what we need to become more resilient and be better prepared. That information can be folded into and inform our capital improvement program planning process. So what projects that are already on our capital improvement program might have a nexus with fire preparedness, whether it be upgrading treatment plants, hardening structures, what have you. And then it also helps initiate dialogue with the agencies that are responsible for fire protection, fire districts, Marin County itself, the newly formed Joint Powers Authority. So really it's also to initiate dialogue and obtain comments and input from others. The draft wildfire resilience plan that we started on back in April of 2019 was organized mostly in accordance with emergency planning conventions. So the meat of the document are sections 3 through 7, which you'll see in many like FEMA documents: threat identification, mitigation, planning and preparedness, response and recovery. For our plan, we modified it. We felt it was relevant to really put the fire and water nexus in context. So we've got an introduction section in the report and a background and setting, which really discusses how our situation is unique. And then the end of the draft plan actually ends with some suggested recommendations, all measures, excuse me, hazard mitigation actions that staff have developed, which we feel will improve our resilience to wildfire. So in terms of updates, I'm going to quickly breeze through these 4 items that we have been working on in the past year. I think I forgot to mention that the draft plan was actually completed back in March of 2020. So it's almost been a full year. We've been working on a lot of things, including, dealing with COVID, but we've made some really good progress, and I'll just briefly spin through these items. On the front of outreach and engagement, we've reached out to Fire Safe Marin and had some coordination with them. They've reviewed the document and felt it was actually pretty comprehensive. They pointed out and wanted to really highlight the kind of natural nexus between their goal and our goal, and the things that they can actually bring to help us. So as you're aware, they provide information, educational resources, and even provide chipper days, if you will, for managing vegetation for private landowners. And they have suggested that as part of our coordination, they could help us with that process in some manner. And so that's part of the components that we have updated in the final studies to really try to capitalize on that in our outreach efforts. Shortly after finalizing the draft plan, we actually found out that Marin County Fire was in the process of updating their community wildfire protection plan. That's a similar planning level document that is more or less a requirement at the county level for different agencies to actually secure funding, federal funds for vegetation and fuels management. And as part of that document, they also set a goal of trying to improve and protect water resources, municipalities and water service. So staff at the district reached out to Marin County Fire, similar to years past, and we were able to get a number of our projects that are listed in our final study integrated into their planning document. And that's important because that planning document also, in terms of setting priorities, it kind of reflects a consciousness of what we deem important to protect our system. And then so that is wrapped up into county level goals. And then second, the other important factor is that projects that are included in the CWPP will receive priority funding when funds become available. And then in addition to that, they also can benefit from more streamlined NEPA clearance. So when you get federal funds, not only do you have to deal with CEQA at the state level, but you also have to deal with NEPA. And so by getting on that list, if we're able to obtain federal funding for those projects, we can streamline our environmental compliance process. In addition to reaching out to Fire Safe Marin and Marin County Fire, we've also reached out to MCL. They have a fire and environment working group. Carrie actually just mentioned them about water conservation. They're also working in that respect to change landscaping practices to be more fire resilient as well. So there's also a nexus with drought and wildfire preparedness. And then we've also reached out to the Marin County fire chiefs. Internally, the things that we've been working on, it's really kind of boils down to three primary actions. And one is that management has essentially gone through the report and really identified who within the district kind of has the skills, the leadership, and also the knowledge to start or to take on these assignments of trying to determine how we could potentially implement these hazard reduction actions. So we've developed essentially what's a tracking spreadsheet that has staff identified for each one of the measures that are in the final study, and a process by which we will go through that numerous times a year and check on the status, try to figure out what we need to push some of these things along. If you read the study, you'll obviously see that some of them are different in terms of their time to implementation, their cost. So all of those things are variable, but the idea is that at least having the final study and then this tracking spreadsheet, we have a tool to track our progress over time. And then to get to that, to talk about what we've done through time, I'll just really quickly touch on some of the things that we have completed or made considerable progress on since the draft study was released back in March. The primary, I'd say, task that we really pushed forward was the Sandron emergency generator project. As you're aware, part of the impacts of fire are actually what PG&E does to avoid fires, which is shutting off our power. So Sandron Remote Emergency Generator project, we've made a lot of progress on that. The design is finalized. Construction is going to be starting here in March. We've also been awarded the Fema Grant. Ben actually mentioned that earlier in the meeting, to develop a local hazard mitigation plan. That project is actually expected to be completed in January of 2022. Critical if we want to obtain any sort of federal fundings post-disaster. And it actually also opens up the ability to get funds pre-disaster if you can develop projects that are going to show a cost benefit that pans out in FEMA's mind. So we don't actually even have to wait for a disaster to occur. We can be more proactive and go looking for those funds if we have key projects in mind. The other important hazard reduction action that was identified in the study is actually to complete a water system master plan. Really, I see it as a key to understanding both, the operational capabilities of our system, also to better understand how that could be influenced by wildfire. So we kicked that project off. I think that was started in early October. Mike, you can probably provide a better update, but that program is in process. We've also conducted initial testing of the administrative building electrical panel. Important because we need to identify and design a backup power system for the building. Some other actions that we've implemented up on the watershed actually include removing some barbecues that were in remote, hard to access locations, Rifle Camp, Barth's Retreat, Dell, and Protero Camp. We've also been working with the county to close Bolinas Fairfax Road during red flag events. That wasn't always the case, so it's good to have cars stopped at the gate now, not traversing all the way across and down into areas which would have really large or long response times. We've also upgraded the district's Type 4 fire engine. So we actually purchased a used one from Marin County. Better engine, newer, new components that will definitely improve our ability to respond. We've completed many acres of vegetation management at Potable Treatment Plant. I can't really see in the photo. Let me drag out of the way, but let's see here. Here you can see some workers actually clearing vegetation right near one of the clarifiers at Bon Tempe. And then we've also installed 2 new fire condition signage signs at Sky Oaks and then also on Bolinas Fairfax Road, just to keep people, more aware. Let them know that we are in the middle of fire season. When we are, ranger staff actually goes out and changes those signs based on conditions. And then the final component was really to kind of wrap up the draft plan, so make some revisions based on feedback that we have received from external agencies, legal review, formatting, and just general corrections. And then also to provide a table that actually summarizes the status of the various hazard reduction actions that were identified in the original report. So now the final chapter actually includes not just an identification of what those hazard reduction actions are, but it also provides a status and where they lie at the completion of that report. So overall, the idea would be to, as we update this report, we kind of have a tracking mechanism to show the sort of progress made in meeting our overall goal. Next steps are really to continue to pursue all of these hazard reduction actions that we've identified. The biggest one right now, I think in process is really the master plan study, the local hazard mitigation plan. That doesn't just apply to wildfire preparedness. It also applies to seismic. You could say that it also applies to drought. So, and then there are a number of hazard reduction actions in the study that will actually be kind of fleshed out in the recreation plan. So that's another item that we'll be progressing. And then the other big thing is really to continue to engage the Fire Chiefs Association and the various fire protection districts in Wright County moving forward. And that concludes the presentation. I'll take any questions.
That was a great presentation, Aaron.
It was very
Uh,
thorough, yeah.
I'm very impressed also by the fact that we purchased a used fire engine from the county. That's just great thinking, great action, you know, because those things get so little use, but they're so critical. And, you know, they do get old, but they still work fine. Great move.
Right.
Aaron, I got a couple of comments and I want to reiterate Director Russell's praise. It's a very good report and obviously a lot of work. And I think one of the keys is the coordination with outside agencies. So I think coordinating with the County Wildfire Preparedness Plan is great, not only just for the physical implementation, but the financial coordination, I think is critical. Because, you know, we're limited as far as our financial resources to do this. So I really appreciate that. One of the other things that I thought could be improved on the threat identification, what I didn't see was any mention of the residential development in the WUI adjacent to the district. And I think that is going to be increasingly important for us to recognize. And I think it's going to be increasingly important for our customers that they understand that their own home could be the source of an ignition, which is actually, if you look at some of the historic fires that are listed in the report, a couple of the big ones, you know, were started by residential users back in the day. I'm not talking about the more recent ones, but so I think coordinating with Fire Safe Marin is critical. I talked to Sean and Crystal last week about doing an overlay of our district with the Fire Safe Marin neighborhood groups so that we know which neighborhood groups we should be outreaching to. And I know you guys have been doing some of that, but I think identifying WUI development as a source of ignition should be included in the plan. And then my last point, which is sort of, I mentioned this, I think, on another one of the plans. For some reason, the maps do not include the town of Fairfax. So it lists all the towns, but no Fairfax. There's a dot where Fairfax should be. So I don't know if you can edit your PDF before you put it out for final, but there is a town of Fairfax. There's a dot through the town of Fairfax, but it'd be nice if it's identified because
I think we could get it on there.
you can do that. Okay.
We could put you on the map.
Okay. That would be much appreciated because Fairfax really is sort of, it's sitting in the middle of the watershed. So, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind
Especially as you know, with regard to potential sources of ignition that could be caused by, you know, residential components for sure.
Yep. Yep. So that's about it for me, but no, it's a nice piece of work. It really is. So I want to thank you for pulling it together.
Absolutely.
She's muted.
Yeah, President Collier, on mute, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm asking if there's any public comments on this item, Terry.
Yes, Mr. Roger Roberts.
Okay.
Hello again.
Hi, Roger.
Hi. One of the things that has concerned me across the state, and it applies here in Marin County, is the historic buildup of fuel load. And I read the report, which is very comprehensive, but I may have missed something. I didn't see anything in the plan associated with reduction of fuel load. Now, I recognize that that's a terribly expensive and costly process. I mean, you've already experimented with some of that in terms of the work that's been done, I believe, in association with Cal Poly on, and maybe other universities on reducing, if you will, the understory in our watershed lands. So I recognize it's terribly expensive, but I would urge Marin County, Marin Water District to have some planning exercise associated with this resiliency report in terms of trying to find ways to deal with the fuel load that's built up over the decades. And I'm mindful also of a report that I read not too long ago about the Forest Service, which is trying to deal with that same issue in national forests. And I think, for example, that they have developed a strategy of checkerboarding so that they didn't have to clear every square acre, but reduce the ability of a fire to spread through a kind of checkerboarding action. And I don't know what all the possibilities are, but I think the report ought to include some studies and planning associated with how to deal with this enormous buildup of fuel load that we have in the watershed.
Well, I would take just a brief crack at that the BIFUP is really our vehicle to address the fuel buildup on the watershed. And so far, the kind of the first year plus rollout seems to have gone really well in terms of both production and coordination with the key stakeholders, regulators, MCL, and plenty of others in terms of doing that work in the sensitive habitat. So we are focused on it. It's an interesting point that, you know, we could link the two because that's certainly a huge component of, you know, mitigation efforts in terms of wildfires. It's a good comment, Roger.
Any other public comments on this item?
Yes, Director Kohler. We also have Mr. Larry Menekes.
Great, Larry.
There, got it. Good evening, folks. Aaron, that was a really good presentation. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to emphasize that working with the CWPP is really critical. It's called countywide, and you guys are part of the county. So the more integration there is between plans, the better everything's going to work together. And what I found in the CWPP and pointed out, and a shortcoming of the MWPA as well, and I actually learned this from the Water District about 20 years ago, is the critical need for a post-fire mitigation and recovery plan. And that's even more critical for the watershed because we do know, we've learned that more damage can occur post-fire than from the fire itself. And that includes having a native nursery ready to go, having seeds, having a plan in place. And this might be more of a BIFIP issue, I'm not sure. But it's something that's really missing in Marin. And I know the watershed years ago, when we were working with on the CAC, on the watershed CAC, we had conversations about this and about its importance. And that's really where my education came from on this. And with that, Larry, I was glad to see you, Larry Russell, I was glad to see you pick up the Marin Conservation League newsletter and hold it up. Thank you for doing that. And I've also learned that if we do have a fire and we lose some properties, we'll be in better shape, it sounded like, because we won't have as much demand. But then, of course, you won't have as much money coming in. Yeah. So there's a problem with that plan as well. In any case, I appreciate tonight's meeting. I just thought I had to add a little bit of humor to the end there. Thank you.
Which we always appreciate, Larry. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, are there any other public comments, Terry?
We do not have any.
Okay. So with that, I'll just thank the staff again for an excellent report on the wildfire resilience study. And that brings us to item 11, an ordinance ordinance adoption to allow for extended repayment schedule for delinquent customers. And this is an approval item.
Yeah, good evening, Board of Directors. I'm Chuck McBride, the Finance Director. So this item does ask for a couple of things. We would like a new ordinance to extend payment plans for delinquent customers, and the staff report also directs staff to make some administrative changes to make our low-income program more accessible. On the ordinance, the addition of ordinance 4447, which is attached, will allow delinquent customers to take advantage of repayment plans with terms of up to 5 years. So presently, the current district code allows repayment plans of 12 months. So customers who are delinquent by 60 days or more will be automatically enrolled in the new repayment plan of 5 years, and then they could opt out of that if they didn't want to take advantage of that. We also had showed the board at the January Finance Committee meeting a survey that was conducted by Wharton, and that survey indicated that delinquent customers were very receptive to an extended payment plan over 12 months. The ordinance, as it's in the attachment, would expire on December 31st of this year, so it would last until the end of the calendar year. And then another item that's brought out in the staff report is some administrative changes that we would like to make for COVID relief. So customers whose annual income is at or below 80% of the Marin County low income level will be able to take advantage of the fee waiver for fixed fees, such as the service charges and the capital maintenance fees. That could provide them with some pretty substantial savings on their bills. The average customer that has a 5/8 inch meter could save a little bit over $460 a year on those fees under this program. So under the plan as we have it, qualifying customers would have fees waived retroactively to March 1st if they met the requirements of this program. Like the ordinance, this program would extend at the end of the calendar year. And then if there are any costs that would be borne by this program, they'd be funded through non-rate revenue. So that is my report, and that's what we're requesting with the action of the board tonight.
I just have a question and comment. First of all, I think it's a very good idea, and I like it. Do we have any idea what other comparable agencies are doing along this line, or are other agencies looking at this sort of direction as well? If we know.
Chuck, this actually did come up. There's periodic calls and discussions with GMs from around the Bay Area. And I'd say we're definitely leading the pack in terms of thinking about this and taking this sort of action. There was quite a bit of interest in what we're doing, both directly with folks on the call and the expectation that their board members would hear about this and they wanted to really understand it. So I think there's a general sense of, as the board has here, of concern in how to deal with this, but I haven't heard anyone moving along these lines in this time frame yet, but I do expect there'll be folks that follow us.
Thank you.
Okay, I agree with Jack. I think this is a good way to go. Do we have any other board comments on this item? Okay, seeing none. Did we have any public comments on this item, Terry?
We do not have any at this time.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. We need a roll call vote, Terry.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Thank you, Chuck. Moving on to item 12, authorizing the general manager to execute professional service agreement with Carollo for the pump station rehabilitation project. Also an approval item.
Good evening, board members. Mike Vaughn, Director of Engineering. Until 2015, the Castanya pump station was used to boost the hydraulic capacity in the North Marin Aqueduct, which is the pipeline we use to bring our imported water supply to the district. This pump station has been offline since 2015. And as discussed earlier during the water supply presentation portion of tonight's meeting, one of the actions we're taking in response to the drought is evaluating the rehabilitation of the Castanya pump station. So in support of this project, we'll be evaluating the operational efficiencies to help us manage our imported water supply, including a review of the current constraints that inhibit our ability to utilize this water during the summer months. Carollo engineers will develop a hydraulic model of the system, review the condition of the existing system, and make recommendations for improvements, which we'll bring back to the board later this spring. In summary, we're requesting the board tonight authorize the GM to execute a professional services agreement with Carollo engineers for the Castanya pump station rehabilitation project in the amount of $140,924 with a staff requested contingency of $40,000 for a not to exceed authorization of $180,294. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks so much, Mike. Seems like a very good idea. Any board comments on this item?
So Mike, this is just essentially a feasibility study.
Yes.
Yeah. I think
Specifically what we expect, we were thinking in May, we had a discussion with Carollo today to accelerate this, that we would bring back really as soon as possible, targeting April, to the board, different project approaches and cost and how it would increase our operational flexibility and the benefit it would provide for decision to move. And we'd probably at that point be talking about different creative ways to move very quickly, unusually quickly on a project like this. So I expect certainly by April to be bringing that back to the board. So this is going to move quickly.
Are we expecting for Carollo to be talking to Sonoma Water?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably more so North Marin. We're engaged in conversations with Sonoma Water, and there's a number of related issues that we need to engage with them on. Yeah. But actually it's both, because we do need to understand the upstream constraints potentially that go into Sonoma Water as we're thinking about design criteria.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think we have to do it.
Any other board comments on this item? Okay, seeing none. Terry, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not have any.
All right, then I am looking for a roll call vote on this. Actually, I'm looking for a motion first.
Second.
Now I'm looking for a vote.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. Thanks, Mike. I'm sorry you had to hang around so long for that, but I'm glad we got it done. Moving on to item 13, this is an approval item to fill an associate engineer position.
Thank you, board. So this item is requesting the board authorize the GM to recruit an associate engineer position in our design group. Unfortunately for us, fortunately for our engineer, they have accepted a position with a fellow agency. So we are requesting tonight to fill that vacancy. This position works with Alex in the design group, working primarily on capital improvement projects, designing the projects, putting out the projects for bidding, and working with consultants to help us on these projects as well. So we're very interested in keeping our capital improvement program moving forward, and so we're looking to fill this position as quickly as we can. So tonight we're asking that you authorize the general manager to recruit and fill the vacant associate engineer position.
And I'll just add, because there was a bit of juxtaposition here tonight, that this is actually intended to fill Aaron Fulton's position. I believe he's still an attendee, and you know, normally I wouldn't weigh in, but I just note that as you all felt tonight, it is a big hit for the organization. And I understand it fits his personal needs and commuting issues much better. So we wish him well, but it is a definite hit for us. He's quite a talented young engineer. Not as young as Ron.
Ben. Okay, any board comments on this item? Okay, Terry, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Now roll call vote, please.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to item 5 that was taken off of the consent calendar. It's an approval item about adopting the Board of Directors Handbook. And I think Director Bragman, you had some comments on this item.
Right. So, and I appreciate moving it to the end of the agenda, because obviously we have a lot of sort of critical business we needed to take care of. So as currently drafted, I'm going to vote no on the updated board policy because of the language recommended under the use of title and board advocacy. Let me just start by saying I agree entirely with the recommended policy provision requiring a clear and explicit disclaimer for non-board position matters and advocacy. In reviewing my correspondence for the past 6 years, I've always included such a disclaimer in order to avoid confusion as to my authority. This includes my letter to the Coastal Commission, which was circulated to the board after our meeting on December 1st. That being said, I do not agree with the inclusion of the second paragraph, and in particular, the clause stating that it is the board's preference that members refrain from using their titles and that members should refrain from using his or her titles in matters other than in representation of a board position. While the policy preference may express the board's sentiment, I do not believe that it makes for good public policy. In the landmark case of Farley versus Healy, Chief Justice Roger Traynor wrote, "Elected officials have traditionally made declarations of policy on matters of concern to the community, whether or not they had power to effectuate such declarations by binding legislation. Indeed, one of the purposes of local government is to represent its citizens before Congress, the legislature, and administrative agencies in matters over which the local government has no power. In addition to discouraging free expression, in my opinion, the policy does not serve the district well. Our titles are not bestowed upon us by the board. They are earned by a vote of our residents in our districts. I believe that public participation by members not only fulfills the rights expressed by Chief Justice Traynor, it's consistent with the district's historic birth as a public agency. Hence, as currently drafted, I'm voting no on this item. So that is my statement. I do think putting the explicit waiver in any correspondence is a very good policy. And I have no problem with it. And I've always tried to abide by that restriction. So that's kind of where I'm at on it. I think it's overkill. And I can't agree to consent to that kind of a statement of policy.
I'll just say that I respectfully disagree. I think we have different views about the success in the past about distinguishing between a personal opinion and a board and a district position. And I think also that there is nothing to prevent a member of this board from expressing their position, but I think I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any danger of suppressing speech or personal views. But I think there is a serious problem in representing, however unintentionally, the position of the district when those titles are used. And it may not be as clear to everyone about the views being expressed. So I'm going to say that I'm very comfortable with the language and I'm planning to vote for it. Do we have any other board comment on this item?
Could somebody read that language again?
Molly, can you do that for us?
Yes, I can. I'm going to just read the second paragraph of the provision because I think that's the paragraph in question.
Okay.
And it states, it is the preference of the board that board members refrain from using their titles to engage in advocacy on matters that do not reflect the position of the board. If, however, an individual board member elects to engage in producing any correspondence, public comment, or oral presentation, or to engage in advocacy on matters other than in representation of a board position, the board member should not use his or her board title or otherwise suggest or imply that their position reflects the position of the board or the district. The provision does go on to state that if a board member produces or engages in advocacy and finds it necessary to use their title, the advocacy must be accompanied by clear and prominent disclaimer stating that the position being expressed is that of the individual board member and does not reflect the position of the district or the board. And that is actually the third paragraph.
Okay, so with that language, am I safe in assuming that if a board member is making a point before some other body and they say, I am a member of the board, but this is, I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, and this is not necessarily an opinion of the board, or does that violate our policy?
No, it doesn't.
That's consistent with the policy as Molly read it.
Okay.
Correct.
That's
so a question. So if you were doing a presentation, at a conference and you're listing, your your affiliations, one of which might be being a board member, would you need to have a disclaimer in the title in order to then go forth and say whatever your opinions you're presenting on?
I would think so.
The way that I would interpret this is just that it's clear that if there was a discussion stating opinions of a particular member, that they make clear that those are their opinions and that they're not reflecting the position of the board, unless in fact that is an express position of the board.
Well, and I go farther than that, Molly. I mean, I think that as you've read it, I mean, this really goes to specific advocacy, and you're talking about I'm presenting at a conference. I don't even think it's relevant there. If you're just listing your credentials at a conference, I don't think this provision even comes up.
Well, I mean, advocacy is in the eye of the beholders, so I think a caution around using your title and whether people read that to mean that your statements or whatever you're presenting reflects a shared opinion of the board is the concern. But I think I'm still seeing a gray area where it's not entirely clear to me. I don't know if maybe the language of the provision could be tightened or something to provide a little bit more guidance, but it seems otherwise to, for the most part, indicate not using your title unless you essentially are expressing an opinion that is an opinion of the board.
Well, let me ask Molly this question. Would you see simply listing your, I mean, I think in your situation, I mean, just to play out what you're saying, Monty, I mean, if you're at a conference and you're there representing, your slide is, Monty Schmidt, the Nature Conservancy, but in your bio, you say you're a member of the board. I don't think that's using your title, right? You're not, it would be different if you were saying, I am here as a member, representing Marin Municipal Water District, right? I think, to me, that's a very clear distinction. I think that's a pretty bright line.
I agree. I mean, I think that, we struggled with clarity and lack of clarity of this provision already. I think it's much improved actually. And I think it is clear. I think when you're doing a presentation and you have a biography that simply states your position, I don't think that that's in any way giving the impression that you're presenting as a board member on behalf of the board, simply that's a part of your credential, which is, I think, not a violation of the policy.
And under that context, you would not have to say, and the board has not taken this position, or.
I think there could be circumstances that could come up where there might be questions that are touch upon the particular work or related to the board. I mean, for example, Director Schmidt giving a presentation, may have questions that are related to what the board is or isn't doing on the watershed. And in that case, I think it might be appropriate to specify I'm speaking on my own behalf and my own opinions, and unless there's a stated position of the board that Director Schmidt would be sharing. So it does call for a bit of judgment. I don't think that the intent of the provision is at all in any way trying to be a gotcha. I think it's the intent of the provision is to express the sentiment of the board consensus, and that the intent is to have it be clear to the public when a board member is speaking, whether they are speaking on behalf of the board and stating a position of the board, or whether they're providing their own perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not really what it says. It says, if a board member elects to engage in producing any correspondence, public comment, or oral presentation, or to engage in advocacy on matters other than representation of a board position, the board member should not use his or her board title. So, I think it's not that clear. I understand it's expressing the sentiment of the board. But again, I don't think sentiment makes for good public policy. I think the third paragraph is adequate and sufficient. If you're not talking about a board position, you need a disclaimer, period. So that's the way I feel. I think the second paragraph is overbroad and ambiguous, and it's not good policy in my opinion. And I don't think it should be a board policy.
Well, we're gonna just have to agree to disagree about this, Larry. And I think there have been letters in the past that have been signed with the board title, which is a very direct form of advocacy, and it makes me very uncomfortable. And I think it should make anybody on any elected board uncomfortable. And I think it's absolutely important policy. Okay. It's not stifling anybody's speech. Nobody's saying you can't write the letters, but when you write them saying, I am signing this letter in my position as a board member, you are making a very strong inference that this is the position of the district. And I'm very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, except what you're ignoring is that this requires a disclaimer when you do that. And what you're ignoring is that the record reflects that those disclaimers, that I've always used those disclaimers. So I understand your concern, and that's what the third paragraph addresses, and that's what should be addressed.
I think
And
we're
that's
just,
what the record reflects has always been addressed.
I think
So
it is appropriate
we're
public
talking-
policy for the
you're-
board to
you're
express a
making
preference.
accusations that really are not backed up by the record.
Well, I think it is appropriate for the board to express a preference in light of some of the things that have occurred in the past. And, you know, again, we're just going to have to agree to disagree about that. I appreciate your position, and I hope you appreciate mine.
I will say this, that this board handbook, it's proposed to be adopted as board policy, but it's not etched in stone. And again, I don't think the provision is intended to be a trap for the unwary. And it certainly can be a living document and evolve if there ever is an interest of the board to change the provision.
I heard Monty suggest that maybe we should take a closer look at just this section. Does anybody agree with that position?
Yes.
I just wanted to reflect, and we can do that.
You're breaking up.
Really hard to hear you, Ben.
Oh, shoot.
Ben, is there a way for you to just, have you got a headphone or anything? It's impossible to hear you.
Yeah. I'll bow out of this.
Okay. This provision has been hanging around for about 1.5 years, and I would like this done tonight. I mean, if we need to delay this, we can. What is the preference of the board? Larry Russell, you haven't weighed in.
Well, to me, it seems a bit of a lot about nothing, but I think that we should just move forward, and if we need to revise it, we'll revise it. You know, it's not cast in concrete. You know, so I understand the semantics, and I understand Larry Bragman's point, but it just doesn't come to my heart as a real problem. I think the language is okay. As he said, the intent is there, and I think it's a good intent. So I'm cool with it.
My concern is that, and the reason I suggest Monty might be able to have a good idea by taking a look at it, if the language is not absolutely right, it's something we will be fighting about in the future. And I would prefer to avoid the fights, quite frankly, and clearer language might help us avoid the fights.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest then that, so it sounds like Jack, and Monty, it's your preference not to move forward tonight. Am I right about that?
Director Kohler, could I jump in
Sure.
briefly? I just wanted to note to the board that a tremendous amount of time and energy has been spent on this, and we have a lot on our plate. And I would just urge the board to consider moving forward. And I don't say it lightly, but I also do want to share the hours and hours and hours that have brought us to this point. And, you know, it is a preference, and it's not that this document can be changed. It will be changed. We are going to bring this to the board at a minimum of every 2 years, and maybe more frequently, and we'll be able to fine tune it at any point that, you know, some board members would like us to. So I just wanted to weigh in with that, and it's difficult because this is, you know, a real policy decision and not mine to make or really weigh in, but I did want to share the staff time and effort that has gone into this has been very, very significant.
Well, I'll thank you for that, Ben, and that helps a great deal. Obviously, I get only so many months I get to keep claiming I'm the new guy, so I'm obviously catching up on a lot of history. There was more history here than I was aware of. And I don't feel super strongly about it. It's the language does, as I threw out my own example, it wasn't entirely clear in the way I was hearing it for the example I provided. I think it's a very different thing when we're signing correspondences. I think that's a really different thing in that context. And I think I can see where that could cause some concerns and a great deal of confusion. I don't want to. I'm mindful that we have a lot of other really important things to address here and ongoing. So I don't want to drag things out. I don't feel super strong about it. But I want to, you know, if I agree with Jack that getting it right enough that it's not going to cause ongoing consternation and more trouble down the road can be worthwhile if that's where it's at. But I will stand the way that.
How about this for a compromise? Why don't we agree to put it forward and then review it in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months and see if there's problems occurring because of it, or it's not addressing the real root issue. We have kind of a lack of going back and looking back on issues like this. We don't tend to, you know, we pass them and then it solves a problem for the immediate future or immediate moment, but we don't really look at them back and go, oh yeah, look at that, that needs to be changed. Or, you know, we've been doing that over the last 5 or 10 years, just to give you a feel, Monty, for how long this takes. Armando was actually the champion of it, as I recall. And the plan was, I think it was one a month or something like that, or one a something. Look at the board policies. If you've seen the book, right? The binder. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information there and a lot of good, solid thinking. There's also a lot of irrelevant information because time has moved on, but the book hasn't been updated.
I appreciate that.
We're getting better at it. We're getting better.
Director Russell, we actually do have some plans to do that, and actually with the adoption of the board handbook, and I think it's stated in the staff report, we do tend to bring forward in the near future repeal of certain policies that would be covered in this handbook and then be unnecessary or they're outdated. And we're starting to go through the sifting process and looking at and evaluating board policies, but also certain ordinances, certain provisions of our code that also need to be looked at. And it's a process, and you balance the long-term sort of cleanup process with the immediate needs of the work that it's pressing. But it all needs to be done, and so we are trying to undertake that.
Yeah, I think it almost goes back to the mimeograph times.
Some of them do look like that.
They do. The quality of reproduction is marginal.
Right.
My final comment, you know, I don't think you pass policy until you get it right. And this is policy in search of a problem that doesn't exist. And it's overbroad. So, you know, it's just something, you know, I agree compared to drought, compared to finances, but it's kind of at the core of our mission as a public agency. And I think you got to get it right before you put it in print. So.
We agree about that. I would say we did get it right. We spent a lot of time on this, and I disagree that it's a problem in search of a solution. This is a problem that's been a problem for a while, and we finally have a solution. It's taken us a very long time to get here.
Yeah.
So again, I understand that we disagree, but we have some history here.
Yeah, I think you can argue about policy, but you can't argue about facts. And the facts in the record indicate it hasn't been.
Well, so I think when you send a letter that says that it's labeled MMWD poison drop, you are sending a very strong message that you are advocating, that you are representing an MMWD position. And that is what happened.
Except when there's Cynthia, there was a disclaimer on the letter.
The title of the letter in the record was MMWD poison drop. Look at, Larry, I'm not going to tolerate it again. It is true, and I am not going to have you on the public record tell me that I'm saying something that isn't true. Look at the letter and look at the record. Molly, I'm asking you to step in right now.
Does that, Cynthia, does
right
that
now?
Right now. Thank you very much, President Kohler. Director Bragman, we've had the letter circulated, and I know that there's a disagreement about the impression that it left, but there is a letter, and I understand that that's the source of the concern, and I don't want to get into the details. I really think the most productive thing to do here would be to either move forward with the provision as is and take a vote. It doesn't have to be unanimous to pass. It's a policy of the board. Or alternatively, move forward with the board handbook without the provision and direct staff to continue to work on some language. But I think that, you know, either of those is something that we can do this evening without arguing further about historic events that have occurred.
Not that historic.
I have a motion.
I want this letter in the record of this meeting. I've had enough of being
I
told
have
that
a-
I'm not
We
speaking
will-
exclusively. I have really had enough. And I am
Okay.
not going to tolerate it any further.
Okay.
So President
I
Kohler
am
is
not.
asking staff
Clearly.
to include a copy of a letter that she circulated that she's referring to.
I didn't circulate it. Larry circulated it.
Nope.
And I want the
I'm
and I want
sorry.
the
I
title of the
missed-
letter in the record. The title of the letter.
I believe the letter was circulated after the December 1st meeting by you.
You
It's
provided
a
it to
letter
Armando.
It's a letter from Director Bragman.
To
I
the
have a
coastal-
motion.
to the Coastal Commission.
I have a motion.
Yes.
Can I make a motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's up to the president of the board.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, I move approval of the item with a specific direction to staff that without further direction from the board, this will be automatically brought back in 6 months for a review and reevaluation.
I'll second it.
This item only, I'm talking about, not the whole handbook, this item only.
Got that. Thank you.
Okay, we're looking for a roll call unless there's any public item on this comment.
There are none.
Public comment on this item, I think is what you were trying to say there.
Sorry, yes.
There are none.
Item- Okay.
Dir-
we're looking
Director
for roll
Bragg,
call vote.
Director Bragman,
No.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Okay,
Thank you.
that brings us to our last item, which is future agenda items.
So there aren't any changes on the staff report except for the very last date that was tentative to decide whether we want to have our 10-year financial plan workshop to either on Tuesday, March 23rd or Wednesday, March 24th. I have now received all of your dates, and it's been decided Tuesday, March 23rd from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So I just wanted to make sure that you're all in agreement with that for workshop one. I'm sorry, for workshop 2, Tuesday, March 23rd from 9 to noon. And that's
Works for me.
Any objections?
Everyone else
Let's
okay?
do it that way. Gary's been trying to pin this down.
Yeah.
And that's all I have. Everything else on the staff report is you have 2 meetings tomorrow morning at 9:30, which is our communications and water efficiency meeting, and your operations committee meeting this Friday. And then, of course, our finance and administration committee meeting on next Thursday, the 25th. And that's all I have.
Okay, any board comment on this item? Any public comment on this item?
There are none.
Okie dokie. Then we are, unless Ben, you've got anything else, I think we are adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.